in the mood to have the case experience. So let's go ahead and start. So every good story needs a hero, which for those of you who have who know my cartoons, you might recognize that. We need a quest, a challenge, and last but not least, I recommend a beverage, mostly because it will just make me sound a lot smarter. So not that the beverage is required, but if you want to, feel free to start partaking now. Everyone's calling for the jokes back, and now my screen has frozen. Oh my goodness! It doesn't like my jokes. See, I put beer up, and it starts freezing on me. All right, we are going to jump straight into. I blame Al Gore too. Thank you. Thank you for the cheering section. All right, so we're going to go ahead and come in here. I'm going to be talking about a case experience that I came across. It was a data spoliation case, and it just happened to involve a program called CCleaner. So the reason that I call this a case experience instead of a case study is because rather than going into the full detail of the beginning to the end of a case study, I'm just going to be focusing on a few specific artifacts that proved interesting during my analysis. So just kind of going into it, because it is a data spoliation case, there are a few things that make it interesting. By their very nature, if data destruction is successful, that means there's going to be less information for an analyst to uncover. But luckily for us, data destruction usually isn't fully successful, since computers retain information in a lot of different locations. And so looking in different spots can give you some insight into what was going on. And another thing that works in your favor during a data spoliation case is the fact that when people try to cover their tracks on a system, a lot of times they make additional tracks. So even if you can't necessarily recover certain deleted files or things like that, you are able to show that a certain deletion activity did actually take place. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into my exam details. I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to look at these slides beforehand, so some of this might look familiar, but I'm not actually going to talk about specifically what's in the slides, but I'll try to share what I was thinking about as things occurred. So to start off with, this is a list of programs that I've used to put together the artifacts that you're going to see in this case experience. All of these are either free or open source, so feel free to try them out or download them and run your own testing if they aren't already in your toolbox. For the evidence that I was going to be looking at, this is kind of the details about what was looked at. The most important thing here is, though, we have the Windows XP. Now, it's important to know the operating system of your suspect system, not simply because of the differences inherent of Linux versus Windows XP, but even within, say, Windows systems, Windows XP is going to be very different and store information very differently than, say, Windows 7. So that's the most important thing to kind of recognize going into it here. So someone asked, what about EnCase? To be honest, I did use EnCase for the actual case. However, I did not use it to show any of the artifacts that are specific to this case study, and I wanted to include all free or open source so that if there were students or people who didn't have the cases that the other programs, they could go in and kind of reconstruct some of these steps if they so wanted to. But I did use EnCase. I will admit it. All right, so next up we have our objectives. As this said, the client's objectives were pretty targeted. They were just interested in deletion activity from a certain time span. Here it's August 2009 to March 2010. Now what this means is that going into it, I didn't want to do a full forensic analysis. I didn't want to do the extra time and cost that would be necessary to do a full forensic thing. And especially in the civil world where time is money, it can be much more cost effective for your clients if they can come in and give you this target, and then you can then alter your examination to fit that sort of target. So in that targeted analysis, and what we're going to be talking about here, is looking at the registry, the Windows registry. We're going to be looking at some information found in restore points. We're going to be looking at creating a timeline and then testing. Now, this is not a full encompassing even of a targeted examination, but hopefully I can kind of show you some of the thought processes that I had and what I thought as I saw these different artifacts, so that if people are coming in, they can get an idea of what someone might think when they see these things. I don't know if it's what everyone thinks, and I'm actually sure it isn't, but it can be an insight maybe into my brain, which is scary, so sorry about that, guys. Anyway, so we're going to start off with the Windows registry. So I have a fact for you all. The Windows registry is one of the sexiest artifacts known to DFIR kind. It just is. So if you're not using the registry, you really, really need to start doing that. And there's multiple ways that you can do that. You know, there's different registry viewers. What I happen to use for this is RegRipper. And I don't use RegRipper on every single case that I do, but if there's a Windows registry, I'm probably using RegRipper. It really is that cool. So just the exports that you're going to see in here, yes, I did say sexy artifact, most definitely. It really, really is. I have an even worse analogy later. Not bad, just, yeah. Anyway, so this is going to be RegRipper reports. Moving on. All right, so let's go ahead and look. The first software registry hive that we need to look at is the software, or that I chose to look at. And when we look in the software registry hive, we can see that CCleaner, which is a cleaning system, was in fact installed on the system. However, if you look at the install date, it was installed prior to our time frame of interest. It was installed back in 2008. So a couple things. Seeing this in here doesn't mean that CCleaner was run within that time frame of interest, but it does kind of raise a flag, and it makes me think, okay, I know that it's on there. Can I find any evidence, because there is a cleaning software, can we find any evidence that it was actually run on the system itself? So to start looking, the next place that we're going to explore is the ntuser.dat for the specific custodian. Now, one thing that I did not see in the ntuser.dat was the CCleaner executable actually being run. It was nowhere in the active ntuser.dat. However, I did see a few other things. Now, one of the things that kind of got me thinking was this here. We see this ccsetup224.exe. After a little bit of research, you could look on this online. This actually is a setup file for CCleaner, an installer file. So, okay, good. We see that an installer file, at least, was run in the time frame of interest. And as it turned out, this January 11th time frame turned out to be very important for the client. Even though they had this bigger range that they were looking for data spoliation, on this date, the client had been told that auditors were going to be coming and taking a look at some of his information. So the fact that he got word the auditors were coming just hours before we start seeing this kind of activity is pretty interesting to know as we start to generate our timeline. So we have this C-setup being run. And one thing that you may notice is that it is being run from the G drive. So that could mean a couple things. One of my first thoughts when I just saw this on its own was, well, maybe that was an external drive. So at that point, start looking at the system hive, start looking at the mount points in the ntuser.dat. There was no indication that there was an external drive attached that was mapped to the G drive. Well, as it turned out, this particular G drive was actually a network share that was a persistent mapped drive for everyone on the for that company, where everything downloaded from the computer, from the internet, would actually be routed out to that network share before it was run on the system. So we have the network here saying that, okay, yes, it was a G drive, but it wasn't an external drive. It was actually downloaded from the internet. Another thing that we see that on its own probably isn't of the most importance is that there is a defrag that was run less than a half hour after the C setup. Now, defrag on its own doesn't mean that there was data deletion. However, when you have a defrag in association with data deletion, it can point you to the idea that there may have been an attempt to overwrite deleted data. All right, so someone actually asked, looking at the activity for 2009 to 2010, how long after did you work on the case? Now this is actually what made this case a little bit more of a challenge. In this, the computer had actually been in use for quite a few months after this time frame of interest. So what that meant is actually it works out perfectly to bring me into the next one. So a lot of the information that may have been useful might have just not be there anymore. Well, so it kind of bugged me, kind of going in here and looking at, seeing that there was a setup, but not actually seeing that the executable was run. So I started looking back in restore points. Now restore points are found in Windows XP. They predate the volume shadow copies that you see now in Windows 7, things like that. But one of the things that's included in restore points is a snapshot of the registry from that specific time frame. So it's almost like you can turn back at least the clock, at least for the registry itself, within these restore points. So what I did is I went out and looked at this restore point. This restore point happened to be restore point 500. I found that by the timestamps, and then you can link the correct restore points back to the correct ntuser.dat based off the SID, which you find in the SAM file. So it could trace this back to that specific custodian. When you come in here and look, sure enough, we see that CCleaner itself was actually being run. Douglas asked if the network path was found in the registry and or link files. It was actually found in both. In this case, I'm not looking at all of the different artifacts. I'm kind of focusing in on just a couple of them. It just was too long to try to do this, to try to track it down all into 15 minutes. In fact, I'm not doing a very good job on that, but there is a lot more information that you would see to correspond to this kind of information if you look into those other artifacts. So I hope I answered that okay. All right, so moving on. So one of the interesting things though here, and if you read my case study that I put on my blog, I kind of mentioned it there where I said one of the interesting things is we see that CCleaner is being executed at 1916. This is UTC time, 1916. But if we look at the active registry, we see that the setup file is being run at 1917. Okay, so we see the fact that it's kind of happening very close to each other is interesting, but what was interesting to me is, so the program was run, then an installer file was run, and then what? Is that kind of information consistent with CCleaner actually being used on the system, or was it simply updated? So that's where testing kind of came in, at least for me. So one of the first things that I do when I'm coming in and I'm testing a program that I may not be familiar with is I Google it. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a good source of information. However, don't rely on Google for your full amount of information that you're going to use, because what a program says it does, what the end user sees it doing, is not necessarily going to be the same as what it's actually doing underneath the hood, so to speak. So what you want to do is get familiar with what it says it does, and then start reviewing that information, download it, run it in VMware, and then actually look to see what it does. So in here, if you're not familiar with CCleaner, I just kind of included a few different snapshots of the different tools and options that you can have. So you see it does have an option for secure file deletion, things like that. Now there's someone in the community that actually wrote a really great plugin for RegRipper that will go in and look at the settings for CCleaner. That's available online, and I'm sure we can find you the link for that. So, but yeah, he's made that fully available. So if you are doing a case with CCleaner, now that that's available, I would highly recommend going in and looking at that. Now, I was asked, when you test, to use exactly the same version of CCleaner. Now, actually, in this case, I tested two different things, and there were two different scenarios that I was essentially testing. The first one, just to see what CCleaner was doing on the system, just to see what it would remove and what kind of things it would leave behind. yes, you want to get the same version. And in fact, Piriform has made older versions of CCleaner available online. So you can go in and get all of these previous versions and run your testing on those specifically. However, in this case, I wasn't necessarily interested specifically in what that one was doing, because I also wanted to see what the registry would show, not when it was run, but when it was updated and then run. So I hope that makes sense. So I wanted to look on the registry. So I didn't have time to really go in and show you some of the nitty-gritty of what happens on the system when you run CCleaner. But if you're interested in it, I would highly recommend doing some of your own testing, because it actually can be really, really fun. So here I have some of my test steps. Again, this is the testing where I'm not looking to see what it does, but to see what the registry shows it does. So to do this, I tried to mimic as much as possible the suspect computer. I had Windows XP, and the one that I used happened to have CCleaner already installed. So that was great for me. If you don't have one with an older version of CCleaner already installed, you can download a previous version and then run it there. Because what CCleaner does is it actually has a built-in functionality that when you run it, it will look for any newer versions, and if there's a newer version available, it will prompt you to update it. So that's really great. So in reconstructing the user steps, we go in, run CCleaner, it prompts us to update, we hit yes. After it is finished installing the new version, you simply run it. At that point, you can look at the registry hides and see exactly what happened. And as it turns out, the active registry hides of the test system mimicked what I saw in the restore point and also the custodian active registry, where we see CCleaner being activated, and then after the run of CCleaner, we see the C setup without a follow-up of anything else, at least in the registry itself, of what was going on. Now, I said earlier that the registry is one of the sexiest artifacts known to DFIR kind. Well, if that's the case, if registry is a sexy artifact, then log to timeline is the nightclub where all the sexy artifacts come to party. Log to timeline is fantastic. And I have to admit, when I first did this case, it's a little bit older case, I did not have log to timeline in my toolkit yet. So it was really interesting to come back and to run log to timeline on a case that I had already run and already written up, and to see what sort of information I might have been able to get from that. It's wonderful. For those of you who haven't tried it, it is basically what it does is it does a lot of the legwork for you. It goes out to all these sexy artifacts and it says, hey, let's come back, let me pull out your data, and let's put it all in one searchable location that you can look through it. So this is just a very, very small time shot of what log to timeline can pull up. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. There's simply too much to go through. Yeah, one step away from the find evidence button. It's very, very true. There's so much good stuff in there. It still takes some sitting down and analyzing, but it really does so much of the legwork for you. It's fabulous. All right. So I know I'm kind of getting beyond my timeline, so let's go ahead and move on to reports. So I've included just some really basic report excerpts here to show what I might have written in a case like this. These are not full portions of a report, but hopefully it gives you a kind of idea of kind of the terminology that I tend to use. It doesn't mean it's the best, but this is kind of what I might have used, because I know it's really nice to see what other people put out there. So one of the things that I like it to include is, if a timeline is really important, having a condensed timeline in a graphic format is a really good way to get that information across to your clients, because they can ingest this kind of information much faster than they can ingest something in a spreadsheet. For us, a spreadsheet is searchable and it's filterable, and we want it like that. But to just convey that information, having a graphic is very, very useful. Here I have my summary. Usually I have my summary in paragraph form. It doesn't have all of the technical details that I include in later sections, just kind of the high level, here's some information, and I try to include just a little bit of background that might give a little bit more window into what kind of information, what kind of background I have. And then at the end, I like to have a list of numbered conclusions. And these will be basically one fact at a time listed out that that I have determined from the examination. And then immediately after these conclusions is where I will have my signature. So I hope this was interesting to someone out there. If it was, or even if it wasn't, please write your own, because I would also like to look at other people's case studies and see how other people approach problems. And sorry I took out all of the jokes for you guys. I'll do a blog post that includes all of those later, hopefully. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the second half of the presentation. We can turn it over to Kevin. Thank you.